Usually, like when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute precision.
Right, yeah, like it's binary.
Exactly. It's almost like engineering. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at the screen and says, there it is.
Yeah, it's visible, it can be easily categorized, and
Yeah.
I think that gives us a lot of comfort.
But then you step out of the hospital and into the real world, like the world of international diplomacy or global security or these massive corporate legal battles, and suddenly that x-ray machine is it's completely broken.
Is useless, yeah.
Right? We're looking at a landscape that isn't black and white at all. It is honestly completely murky.
Oh, it is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. And, when the foundational rules of how the world operates aren't clearly defined, the consequences tend to spiral out of control, like very quickly.
And that cascading spiral is exactly what we're wading into today. So welcome to the deep dive. We are so glad you're here with us.
Glad to have you.
Today's mission is just a fascinating one. We are unpacking a stack of recent reporting, pulling from Al Jazeera, CNBC, Reuters, PBS, and The Atlantic to explore this singular, sweeping theme. Basically, the real-world consequences of ambiguity.
Right. What happens when the fine print fails?
Exactly. Whether it's a vaguely written peace treaty that inadvertently sparks a global shipping crisis, or unregulated algorithmic code that threatens to physically dismantle a trillion-dollar tech empire.
It really is a domino effect. We're going to look at how a lack of clarity in one room can literally shut down a shipping lane halfway across the world, and how that exact same dynamic plays out in our legal and digital lives, too.
Now, before we jump into the deep end, I do need to make something very clear to you, our listener. Today's sources contain some highly politically charged material. We're talking world leaders, ongoing international conflicts, extremely sensitive legal battles.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
Right, so we are not taking any sides here. We're simply acting as your impartial guides to convey the facts and the ideas exactly as they're reported in the original source material.
Just sticking to the reporting.
Exactly. Yeah. And we have the perfect co-pilot here today to help synthesize these massive global shifts and, more importantly, explain exactly how and why they matter to you. So let's start with a ceasefire that essentially collapsed before the ink was even dry.
Yes, the 60-day US-Iran Memorandum of Understanding, which was brokered by Pakistan and signed on June 17th.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because on paper, it sounded like a massive breakthrough, right? It was this 14-point agreement that was supposed to halt military operations, reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and basically create a runway toward a permanent peace deal.
Right, that was the goal.
But within 10 days of signing it, the United States and Iran were trading military strikes again. And the 60-day deadline eventually expired, with negotiations just completely deadlocked.
Yeah, it fell apart fast.
Now, I look at a monumental 14-point peace deal falling apart in 10 days, and I assume someone just blatantly violated a hard rule. Like, did Iran or the U.S. just ignore the border agreements?
That is the logical assumption to make, but no. What's fascinating here is that the deal didn't fail because of what was explicitly in it. It failed because of what was left out.
Wait, really?
Yeah, the ambiguity was just staggering. So the core issue revolved around Article 5, which dealt with the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, and for our listener, the Strait of Hormuz isn't just some random waterway. It is one of the most vital arteries for global energy on the planet. Like, if you're listening to this on your morning commute, you might think the Persian Gulf is a world away. But when that strait shuts down, you're going to feel it at the gas pump in a matter of weeks.
Exactly. The stakes literally couldn't be higher. So, Article 5 promised safe passage for commercial vessels through the strait, but it completely failed to specify the actual routes, or crucially, who actually controlled that passage.
Oh, wow. So they just left a massive blank space.
Right. You had Washington and Tehran looking at the exact same legal document and reaching entirely different conclusions about what they were allowed to do.
So it wasn't that they were ignoring the rules. They were basically just exploiting the empty spaces between the rules.
Precisely. When ships started using an Oman-backed route, they were immediately targeted. So the U.S. resumed strikes on Iranian military sites, arguing Iran was violating the Safe Passage Clause.
Right.
But then Iran retaliated against U.S. installations, arguing the exact same thing. The ambiguity essentially created this legal permission structure for both sides to claim the other was the aggressor.
That's wild.
Former State Department official Joey Hood is quoted in the reporting saying the agreement was doomed to fail from the start.
Doomed to fail. Wow.
Yeah. He specifically noted that it gave Iran the room to interpret the document as granting them sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz and, oddly enough, the future of Lebanon.
Which is another massive oversight we have to talk about. The agreement called for, in quote, immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, including Lebanon.
Uh-huh.
But it didn't explicitly name Israel anywhere in the document, even as Israeli operations in Lebanon were actively continuing.
Right. You can't enforce a ceasefire in a region if you don't legally define all the actors involved in the conflict. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, and the financial mechanisms were just as murky. The deal envisioned at least $300 billion for Iran's reconstruction and development.
Which is a huge sum.
But it never actually specified who was writing the check for that $300 billion. On top of that, the sanctions relief clause didn't clarify if it meant lifting just U.S. sanctions or the broader United Nations measures as well.
Just so many loose ends.
I mean, to put it in everyday terms, it's like the worst group project ever. Nobody assigned who was doing which slides, everyone expected an A, and when the presentation failed, they all just pointed fingers at each other.
That is a perfect analogy, honestly. The foundational terms were just never agreed upon. So by July 7th, President Donald Trump was publicly calling the agreement over.
Just like that.
Yeah, and Iran suspended its commitments entirely. By the time that 60-day deadline actually arrived, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Bakai called the whole thing entirely moot.
Okay, so because that Memorandum of Understanding collapsed into this pile of ambiguity, the Strait of Hormuz essentially shut down.
Completely.
The rules vanished, and we saw this desperate scramble for leverage that ended up bleeding into entirely unrelated parts of the globe. Let's look at the data on Hormuz. Before this conflict escalated on February 28th, roughly 130 vessels a day were passing through the strait.
Right.
But the latest coupler data, which was cited by CNBC, shows that on a recent Sunday, only 3 ships passed through, and the 5-day average was down to 12.
That is a catastrophic drop. It essentially chokes off a massive portion of the world's energy supply chain.
Yeah.
And into that vacuum of authority, Iran's deputy foreign minister, Kazim Garibabadi, stated bluntly that the strait is Iranian and will be opened or closed under Iran's command.
Which prompts neighboring Oman to try and step in,
Correct.
right, as a mediator to get commercial shipping moving again.
Yeah.
And the response from the U.S. President Trump goes on Fox News and says, if Oman gets in the way, we'll bomb the S out of them.
Yeah. You are seeing a total breakdown of traditional diplomatic channels. Trump claims informal discussions are happening with Iran's Revolutionary Guard, who he actually called good poker players, but they're dying.
Wow.
Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, entirely denies that any direct negotiations are taking place. He's stating that Qatar and Pakistan are merely passing messages back and forth.
So we have a frozen strait, stalled talks, and threats of bombing mediators. But here is where the domino effect takes a truly bizarre turn. While all of this chaos is happening in the Middle East, Trump orders his Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, to substantially reduce a major military exercise happening in South Korea.
Right. The Ulchi Freedom Shield exercises. This was an 11-day operation involving 18,000 South Korean troops specifically designed to deter threats from North Korea.
And North Korea had just resumed ballistic missile tests that are explicitly prohibited by the United Nations.
Exactly.
But Trump scales back the defense drills anyway. And his stated reason. He said he asked the president of South Korea to help denuclearize Iran, and South Korea said no thanks.
Yeah, they declined.
So Trump says the drills in Asia are too expensive and hostile toward Kim Jong-un, whom he described as unthreatening and respectful. Oh, wait, let me make sure I'm tracking this. We're punishing a crucial ally in Asia, reducing defenses against a nuclear-armed neighbor, literally because they wouldn't help with a completely separate issue in the Middle East. Like, is this just throwing darts at a map?
It sounds chaotic, I know, but this perfectly illustrates how leverage is changing in modern geopolitics. What you are seeing is a stark shift toward a highly transactional, a la carte foreign policy.
A la carte.
Yeah. The historical model of alliances was a blanket guarantee of mutual defense. You know, you're our ally, we secure your region. But this new approach treats every global issue as a separate negotiation where leverage is basically fungible. The underlying logic here is, if you won't give us what we want in the Persian Gulf, we will withhold our security guarantees on the Korean Peninsula.
But treating global security like a barter system creates massive regional shockwaves. If South Korea feels their defense is completely contingent on unrelated Middle Eastern politics, They have to start rethinking their entire security posture.
Exactly. And this interconnectedness, where drawing resources, attention, and political capital to the Middle East leaves allies in Asia it's actually exposing a much larger, terrifying blind spot for the biggest alliance of all, which is NATO.
Right. So in the military world, the absence of clear, reliable rules leaves a vacuum that bad actors can exploit. And the Atlantic's reporting highlights a literal nightmare scenario for Western military planners. Basically, NATO is entirely unprepared for a simultaneous Russian attack on Europe and a Chinese attack on Taiwan.
Yeah. Florence Gaub from the NATO Defense College said bluntly, let's just say this is the scenario we're currently not ready for.
It's incredibly sobering when you realize how long this blind spot has existed. Retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery noted that the last time he participated in a major exercise examining a two-front conflict with Russia and China was roughly 15 years ago.
It's been 10 years.
And his assessment was that it didn't go well then. He points out that every single metric of readiness, weapons, stockpiles, industrial capacity, allied contributions has gone down since that exercise a decade and a half ago.
Yeah.
I just have to stop you there because my mind is blown. How is it possible that the world's most powerful military alliance simply hasn't rehearsed the absolute worst-case scenario in 15 years?
Because for a long time, Western planners operated under the assumption that Russia and China were completely separate problems, like that they would occur on separate timelines. It's what you call a peacetime bureaucracy mindset. You plan for one crisis at a time. But Russia and China aren't operating on NATO's schedule. Russia has shifted its industrial base entirely to wartime production. They've gained massive, real-world battlefield experience with drone warfare in Ukraine. Meanwhile, China has actually surpassed the U.S. in the sheer number of warships and long-range missiles they can produce. And they have a no-limits partnership now. They are actively coordinating.
And while they're building up, the U.S. is drawing down. The reporting notes that since February, the U.S. has depleted roughly two-thirds of its advanced air defense missiles simply by shifting resources to handle the conflicts in the Middle East.
Yeah, just burning through them.
The Prague-based European Value Center for Security Policy actually ran about 20 different simulations of this exact simultaneous conflict. And the results are grim. In their war games, the U.S. almost always has to prioritize Asia to deal with China, which leaves Europe to basically fight Russia alone.
And that exposes an incredible supply chain vulnerability. Let's look at how defense manufacturing actually works, right? If Europe has to suddenly ramp up production to fight Russia, if they need to build thousands of artillery shells and guidance chips, where do they get the raw materials?
I don't know where.
Currently, they are heavily reliant on Chinese exports for those foundational elements.
Wait, so they would be relying on the partner of their enemy to supply the raw materials to build the weapons to fight their enemy. That is a strategic paradox.
It is a massive one. You cannot decouple a globalized supply chain overnight. This is exactly why NATO Military Committee Chair Admiral Rob Bauer asked what is perhaps the most chilling question in this entire deep dive. He asked, who's getting which troops?
Wow.
Yeah, if resources are scarce and both fronts ignite simultaneously, the political and logistical friction of deciding who gets saved could paralyze the alliance before a single shot is even fired.
It's the ultimate consequence of ambiguity. When you don't have a hardened plan, the crisis dictates your actions for you.
Exactly.
But let's look at what happens when that exact same vacuum of rules exists in the domestic sphere. Because just as geopolitical systems are buckling under these stress tests, our own domestic legal structures are facing their own unprecedented reckonings, where the rules are finally catching up.
Right. We are seeing a very aggressive push by the courts to eliminate legal ambiguity once and for all, and that's starting at the highest level in the U.S.
Yes. Looking at the Reuters reporting, the Supreme Court just rejected Donald Trump's second request to reconsider his $5 million civil verdict for sexually abusing and defaming writer E. Jean Carroll. He had publicly called her claims a hoax and a con job.
Now, in the context of our theme today, what is deeply significant here is the absolute finality of it. He has already paid the nearly $5.63 million, which includes interest.
Right.
By refusing to hear the appeal back in June and then rejecting the request to reconsider that refusal on Monday, the Supreme Court is firmly closing the book on the ambiguity of that specific judgment. There is no more gray area. It is settled law.
And that finality is so crucial, especially because we are still waiting on the much larger $83.3 million defamation case regarding statements he made while he was president. That case hinges entirely on the Supreme Court drawing a clear line around the definition of presidential immunity. They have to decide where the president ends and the private citizen begins.
Right.
But that $5 million case, it's done. The ambiguity has been removed.
Exactly. And while a $5 million penalty is a substantial amount of money, it is basically a drop in the bucket compared to the existential legal threat facing Meta right now in California, where the law surrounding digital products is incredibly vague.
Yeah, this is a monumental case. Meta is in a federal court facing a massive coalition of 29 state attorneys general over child safety. The numbers being thrown around are staggering. Lawyers for the states suggest damages could reach $200 billion.
$200 billion.
And Meta's own attorneys have warned their theoretical exposure could climb to $1.4 trillion. Trillion, with a T.
Let's break down why the stakes are so astronomical. The states are accusing Meta of violating the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, commonly known as COPIA.
And just to clarify for our listener, COPIA is essentially the federal rule that says a tech company cannot collect personal data or track the online behavior of kids under 13 without getting verifiable consent from their parents, right?
Exactly, but the lawsuit goes much deeper than just data collection. They are accusing Meta of deliberately designing a product to foster addictive behavior among kids, and then actively lying to families about the safety of those platforms.
Oh.
California Attorney General Rob Bonta stated plainly that Meta designed a dangerous product for young users, knew it to be dangerous, and then lied. Meta, of course, calls the demands vastly disproportionate and argues they're being singled out for industry-wide problems.
And we know these states have real teeth. Meta recently lost a case in New Mexico that resulted in a jury ordering $375 million in damages and a judge adding a $567 million abatement fund.
Right.
And let's clarify that term, too. An abatement fund isn't just a fine paid to the government. It's a giant pot of money the company is forced to provide, specifically to fix or mitigate the harm their product caused in the community. That's nearly $1 billion in one state alone.
But here's the critical point. The financial penalty, even if it reaches that $200 billion mark, is not the real threat to Meta here.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because the states aren't just asking for a giant check. They are seeking nationwide injunctive relief. In plain English, they aren't just asking for money to cover damages. They are asking a federal judge to legally order Meta to stop a specific behavior. They want Meta forced to delete the personal data of kids under 13. And this is the absolute kill shot. They want Meta legally forced to delete the algorithms and the machine learning models that were trained on that data.
It's a phenomenal request.
Right. They want to kill infinite scroll, autoplay, beauty filters, and the engagement-optimized recommendation feeds. If I can use an analogy here, a $200 billion fine is a massive penalty, but it's just money. What these states are asking for is like telling a bakery that because they used stolen flour 5 years ago, they don't just have to pay a fine. They have to magically extract that specific stolen flour out of every single cake they've already baked, or they have to throw away the entire bakery. They want to dismantle the core machinery.
That analogy hits the nail on the head because we have to look at how an algorithm actually works. When an AI model ingests a teenager's viewing habits, it doesn't just store a discrete file with their name on it in a folder. It alters the mathematical weights of the entire system. It learns a pattern. To remove that specific teenager's influence from the algorithm, you can't just hit backspace on their profile. You essentially have to burn the entire algorithm to the ground and train a completely new one from scratch.
Which is an existential threat to their business model.
Absolutely. This trial isn't just about punishing past behavior. It is about dictating what the internet is allowed to become. Meta generates roughly 98% of its revenue from advertising. That advertising engine is fueled entirely by engagement. Mark Zuckerberg desperately needs that revenue engine running at full speed because he's currently financing an AI push that could cost $145 billion this year alone.
New Mexico Attorney General Raul Torres pointed out that Wall Street analysts aren't actually pricing this existential risk correctly. He noted that an injunctive ruling out of California could fundamentally cripple Meta's ability to finance its own future.
There is a profound difference between a company paying a massive financial penalty, which they can honestly just write off as the cost of doing business, and being legally forced to rewrite the core architecture of their digital platform. If a court rules that the algorithm itself is an inherently dangerous product when applied to minors, you are no longer regulating the company's behavior. You are outlawing their entire business model.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We have covered immense ground today. We started in the Persian Gulf with a vaguely written 10-day ceasefire that left out crucial details, effectively freezing the Strait of Hormuz. We watched how the collapse of that diplomacy triggered a bizarre transactional retaliation, leading to the reduction of military defenses in South Korea.
Yeah.
We saw how pulling resources to handle those interconnected fires has left NATO facing a two-front nightmare with Russia and China that it literally hasn't rehearsed in 15 years. And finally, we brought it back to domestic soil, looking at the Supreme Court stepping in to finalize legal boundaries, while 29 states attempt to legally delete the underlying algorithms that power Meta's empire.
And, in every single one of these scenarios, we are seeing the exact same dynamic. It's the consequences of systems that allowed ambiguity to fester for too long.
Right.
When the exact terms of safe passage aren't defined, missiles fly. When the exact purpose of an alliance isn't clear, global deterrence crumbles. And when the legal boundaries of a digital product aren't defined, you end up with a trillion-dollar trial that could literally break the internet as we know it.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. If California successfully argues that engagement-optimized algorithms are inherently dangerous products that must be dismantled and deleted to protect society, how long until that exact same legal logic is applied to every other digital service we use?
Oh, man.
Right. From the news feeds you scroll through in the morning, to your streaming apps, to the very AI models being built to write code and generate art today. Are we witnessing the beginning of the end for the engagement era of the internet?
It is a question of when, not if, the fine print comes due.
We started this deep dive talking about the clarity of an X-ray. The broken bone is easy to see. But as we've learned today, whether you're trying to write a peace treaty, defend a continent, or regulate a trillion-dollar piece of code, the lines are never clean. The muddy waters are where the real world operates, and navigating them is the ultimate challenge of our time. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep questioning the fine print, and we will see you next time.